I need to cut some tenons in these pieces, but first I've got to make a tenon jig, and I'm going to show you how I do it. I've got a few pieces of plywood over here that I think will do nicely. I think that's about as wide as my fence. Let's get one of these thicker boards here. Yeah, that one's pretty nice. Let's grab that one. Yeah. I think that'll do. Over at the table saw, it's time to get the measurements for my runners. I'm going to measure the height of my fence and add the thickness of the material and then cut them down to that width. Next, I'm going to measure the thickness of my fence and cut a board to that width. With those three pieces cut out, I placed them side by side and measured the thickness across all three, cutting one more board to that thickness. When I'm working off the cuff like this, I like to do test fit fairly often. That way I can catch any small mistakes before I get to the end and realize I've got to rebuild the whole thing. With that test fit done, I'm going to start cutting down all of my boards to the same length. I've chose 17 inches here because that's what felt good for my table saw. You can adjust it for whatever you like for what you need. After cutting down the runners and the top pieces, I'm going to cut an additional wider piece, and I will show you what that's for later. Clamping one of the runners to the top piece, I'm going to start pre-drilling and countersinking my screw holes. This is a trick that I like to use when I'm doing small glue ups like this so that I don't have to reclamp everything. I'll drive the screw in, then I'll back it out just far enough that it's not holding the boards together any longer. What this does is once I put the glue on and I put the screws back in, the screws will make it realign without me having to clamp it and worry about the board sliding around on the glue. When you've got two identical sides, you repeat the process. Completing the second side, I go ahead and mark my pieces because I promise you if I didn't do it, I'd get interrupted and I'd come back and then I'd mix up my pieces and then my screw holes wouldn't align. Let's add some glue. When I put my screws back in, the first one I'll drive about halfway in to kind of hold it in place. And then I'll drive the other two in and let those align the board and come back and tighten down the top one. Making sure to wipe off any excess squeeze out because you definitely do not want any squeeze out on the inside of this because it needs to slide nicely on your table saw fence. With both sides done, I'm gonna give it a little test. Let's get that clamp out of the way, and that looks pretty nice. Making sure everything's square. This board is the board we're going to use to clamp the work pieces to. I'm gonna call it the sled fence. With that clamped in place, I'll place my top board where it's gonna go and countersink my screw holes. Then I'll come back and apply ample amount of glue and spread it out evenly. I've been wanting to build a jig for doing tenons for a little while now. I probably should have built it for my last build, but I didn't. I had a really good excuse to do it for this one. My son's climbing out of his crib and we don't have the conversion piece, so I decided to build it and wanted to match the construction and make it look nice. Top piece secured, it's time to start pre-drilling the holes for the sled fence. Yes, I know, I used way too many screws for this. I probably could have gotten away with probably 6 or maybe even just 3. I'm gonna remove the clamps, do another test fit. I'm gonna check and make sure we're still square to the tabletop. Yep, we're square. I like it. Happy with that. It's time to back out the screws, apply some glue, and then secure it back down with the screws. It would be nice if I could go this fast in real life. Then I'd probably make a lot of mistakes. All right. Now we're starting to come in from the home stretch. I cut a couple more pieces. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do with those right now. This first random 1x4 block that I had, I'm going to use as a handle for the sled to push it with to keep my hands away from the blade. I'm simply going to pre-drill and attach it with screws like I've done everything else. Notice the attachment I have on the end of my drill. It's a flip bit. It has a drill bit with a countersink on one side and then the star drive for my screws on the other. Super simple. I don't have to have a drill and driver out. I simply drill it, flip it, and screw it. I'll leave a link for a similar one in the description. The last piece that we have to attach is our stop. I'm going to attach it at the top with a screw. We're not going to use glue for this piece. Then using my square, I'll square it up and add the last screw. Make sure this screw, got to make sure to lock that bit in place. Make sure this screw is high enough that the table saw blade will not contact it when it goes through this stop. The final steps for this jig is to sand the inside of the box and apply plenty of paste wax to make this thing slide nice and smooth across the table saw fence. Just like this. Now that the jig's complete, let's give it a test run. First, I'm going to cut my tenons. Nice clean cuts, and we're going to cut the inside piece of this for the tenons to slide in. This does work a little bit better if you have a table saw blade that has a flat grind on it. That is definitely on my purchase list. Then I'll come back and cut the shoulders off, and look at that. My first bridle joint, and it is beautiful. And there you have it. Super simple tenon jig that I made out of wood that was left over from other projects. Made some of the best tenons I've made to date. I will definitely be using this in future projects. I'll throw a link down below for some plans. Wasn't gonna do that, but it was simple and I think y'all could benefit from that. So check out the description. Now I just gotta finish building this piece for my son's bed. Okay.